Okay.
All right. We're on the bottom of that page, Gimel. 8 lines from the bottom. The line starts with the word Tevet HaShefa.
I think it stopped here.
Where? בהכר שיש צנרת פרוטין?
תמיד מן הצינור הזה.
We read further. Okay, I can go back there, but we read
Yeah, but you could be you didn't translate that.
I didn't translate that?
No.
All right, so we're going up one line. What?
How's the line start?
Tomid.
Tamid. 9 lines.
The line below Shetach. So the principle of this mashal, overly simplistic mashal, but we have to delve into it and understand how that mashal really gives us an insight into
what is the mashal?
How that also gives us an insight into the principle that we're discussing.
Which mashal is this?
Baruch, I'll come on.
Okay.
That's the point. The point is not to understand to take the mashal in such a superficial, simplistic manner, and then conjure up the Milo also some kind of a physical structure.
Plumbing system.
Huh?
A plumbing system.
A plumbing system. This is a mashal for the effect of the tzimtzum. There was oil in safe, and in order to, and the Ayin Saif is l'mayla migeder hishtalshus, as we have discussed what that means, and therefore in order to facilitate the hishtalshus, there had to be a tzimtzum. As a result of the tzimtzum, there is what's called the gilei hakav, a different manner that the oil is nimshach. And this different manner of the oil being nimshach permits the oil to come and to go into keli, even though it is limitless resource, but it comes in a measured manner. And the mashal for that is of this river. The river has an endless resource of water. River is not like a great lake that has a certain accumulated amount of water, and if you drain from it, you may drain it out. River has no limit. It's an infinite resource. And the important thing is that the manner in which this infinite resource of the river manifests itself is that it immediately shows that I'm infinite. It flows and it spreads in lengthwise and widthwise, and it kind of expresses its limitlessness. Because the river has this nature that it expresses its resource in this limitless manner. Therefore, in order to draw water from the river, that it should serve a specific function, specific purpose, there has to be what's called a tzimtzum. You must contain that in infinite flow, even though you're still going to use the whole resource, because you need all the water that the river can supply and then some. But you need it to be served up in a manageable manner. So, in this, this is the mashal of the tziner, of the conduit. So the first point of the conduit is that the waters of the river are drawn via the conduit, and that fills many keli, and they continuously get filled from this conduit. In other words, a conduit is not limiting how much water it allows to come through. It is just that it goes through the conduit. And then we say further, ubehechrich, it's imperative, sheyesh tzinoires protim, that thereafter there are individual and specific tzinoires, conduits, hamistaf imimenu, that branch off from the major conduit, kidei shetaver hashefa, in order that the shefa should pass through al yodom, through this, via these individual tzinoires, l'chol keli v'keli v'prat. Each keli should be reached individually through these secondary tzinoros. And what we need, okay, so that's what we started talking about this morning. The principle that we need to ultimately understand is that, yes, indeed, you have to fill each keli, and each keli has to be filled with, through a narrower and yet narrower tzinoir conduit, in order to facilitate that the water should go through a tzinoir. There has to be already a restraint in the water. It cannot be that you have the total flow. You cannot have a tsunami fill a conduit. There has to be a restraint before it even reaches this conduit. This is what the Rebbe is describing, that there is a conduit, a tziner. This is the major kav, and then from that, this tziner, which represents the total capacity of the river, the infinite capacity of the river, in a tziner form, that this tziner also in itself is too much, too great of a flow to fill a keli. In order to fill a keli, that has to be further substepped into smaller tzineros. To give us a physical handle on this, for the purpose of understanding this whole concept, which we're repeating all the time, and I hope ultimately we understand. If you take, open up a faucet, and it's a faucet, it's coming in a very narrow thing, but you open it up in full force, and you put a keli on it, the keli will not grab any of the water. The water will come into the keli and jump right out. In order to come into the keli, it has to come through a narrow floor, and it has to come through a restrained flow. This is the concept of the initial tzimtzum that allows it to come through a narrow flow. This is the kav, and then say that hishtalshelus, where it goes continually narrower and more restrained. And the important thing to understand is that you cannot conjure up a fully restrained flow from the river itself. The river and the fully restrained flow have nothing in common. So physically, we understand how that works. But we have to be able to project and understand how this is also in a ruchnistic sense. Like we said many times at the end of this hemshech, that a Rab who is teaching a Talmud, and he has to teach a Talmud a measured seichel in a measured manner. But he cannot even find that measured seichel, and the reason he cannot find because he cannot imagine what the Talmud doesn't know. In order to even for him to project what the Talmud doesn't know, he has to step away from his sense of knowledge that there is reality itself, and recognize that this reality is something that you have to receive, you have to get to know it. It's not something that you know, it's something that you get to know. Once you understand that it's something that you get to know it, there's a process to which you get to know it, then you'll be able to identify what it means before you know it and after you know it. And what are the steps and what are the stages through which you get to know it. Otherwise, there is no relationship there. This is the meaning that the river does not have the tzinoiros. From the river you can get one huge tziner, which is also a great accomplishment. And from that channel, once it is a flow, no matter how great, but it's a flow. It's not just a complete resource. Then you can already restrain it more and great and get and subdivide it into smaller channels.
The Rav has the whole river. He sees the whole view, and then he cannot imagine the student not knowing. But at the same time, he kind of steps away from his own view and says what? Says this I came to know. What's
no? First, he is mitzamtzim. He doesn't know anything.
He steps away and makes it like he doesn't see anything at all.
Doesn't know it. He puts himself into the student's position. And then he begins to refresh, so to speak, his knowledge. Okay, from this vantage point, how do you get to know? What do I know? How do you get to know it?
That move of going to where he, as it was, doesn't know. It's pretty. Can we understand anything about it? Like we said, the river and the restrained flow have nothing in common. So
this is, without realizing, this is a standard manner of communication. I mean, of course, there are differences of what the others might be and so forth. But this is, in fact, the standard manner of communication.
Whenever you're explaining something.
Whenever you're explaining something. It's not the same if you want to explain, Yonah from Alakus into the world, not comparable, but the manner is the same. Even on the physical level of a water flow from the river into a faucet.
Okay. And that's accomplished by this kind of back and forth. And that means ultimately the river and the conduit do find a commonality.
No. The final commonality after the river is completely reintroduced, completely reinterpreted.
Mm-hmm.
When you no longer look at the river as an infinite resource.
Like you can't fathom $1 billion, right? $1 billion, like we wouldn't even know what to do with it, right?
Yeah, right. But the mashal that we have given for that is, like I said, if a person were given the Empire State Building as a personal dwelling, you understand the difference between $1 billion and the Empire State Building?
You used $1 billion before, I thought.
Under different circumstances.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. But
what's the difference?
The difference is that $1 billion, there are individual dollars. And they're spent as dollars. The Empire State Building is a dwelling.
What? What?
It's a dwelling.
Oh.
You don't live in one room at a time. You live in the entire Empire State Building the whole time, at once. There is the illustration of the point. It's very easy to restrain the flow of dollars from $1 billion account. Just don't take it. But if you live in the Empire State Building, that's where you're living. So
We're in the river.
you're right there in the river, exactly right. There's a German over here, I don't know if you guys know him, some of them you'll probably know. David Morris. You know David Morris?
Yeah.
Somebody
The
knows.
lawyer?
Huh? No, he's not.
Oh.
David Morris, whatever he is now, he came from a very wealthy family. And he came to yeshiva and became a frum. So his father never divorced and he married, all kinds of stories you know. Anyway, he came to visit his father. His father built a new house, a new home. On the same property where he held the old home, he built another home. This is his new home. And he invited him to come and see his new home. So he's walking around, he told me this, he's got a chush in the description. So he's taking him from room to room. This is this room, this is that room, and this is that room, and this is this room. You know, a palace. All kinds of, every room is like a salad. And he's walking around and then he said to me, he said, finally I turned to my father and I said, but Dad, where do you sit?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So this is important to understand what it means that you should be gathered, like we discussed at length this morning. Gather Hishtalshalos. It's a different category. Something that's be gathered Hishtalshalos cannot be drawn into Hishtalshalos, no matter what kind of scenarios you produce for it. You have to first restrain it. So that it can relate to a situation where there isn't, and I'm bringing into it. That's Hamshoch, as we discussed many times in this Hamshoch.
Gather means restraint.
What?
Gather means restraint.
No. Gather Hishtalshalos. Gather Hishtalshalos means the parameters, the principles of Hishtalshalos, the parameters that are necessary for Hishtalshalos. The Mailam Gather Hishtalshalos means beyond the gather, that which defines Hishtalshalos. In order for Ein Sof, which is Milad Megeder Hishtalshalos. And why is it, that's what we explained, why is it Milad Megeder Hishtalshalos? Because the Hishtalshalos means something that's coming in, and there's cause and effect. The Milad Megeder Hishtalshalos means there is nothing coming in, it's there all the time. The whole idea of bringing of a flow doesn't exist. No Hamshach. So it's a Milad Megeder Hishtalshalos. It's safe. With the principle of Ein Sof.
So Ma'alim Megeder Hishtalshalos does not mean it's not shaykh to Hishtalshalos. I understand it sounds strange, but we see in fact with the Tzimtzum it becomes shaykh to Hishtalshalos.
That's a new situation totally. Tzimtzum changes the whole situation. Tzimtzum means you have a state where there is nothing there. And now you're first beginning to draw into it. You create a new circumstance totally.
So Tzimtzum is as dynamic as that which is Ma'alim Megeder Hishtalshalos. It must be if it's going to do something with something that's Ma'alim Megeder Hishtalshalos.
It's not doing something like that. It restrains it. totally. Withdraws it. What's
But the ability, do you mean the ability to do that must come from the same ability to be infinite?
Yes, that's true. Only the source of the oil can restrain it. Okay. All right. והדוגמה מזה יובן. And therefore, the reflection of this moshel will help us understand b'bchinas hakav, that there is that in the aspect of the kav. Shehu al derech moshel, the kav itself is similar to the principle of tziner godel, of this great tziner, the great conduit. Hanim shech meir ein soif shelifnei hatzimtzum, that is drawn from the ein soif that's before the tzimtzum. V'nisam tzem b'bechinas kav, and then as it goes through the tzimtzum, it's nisam tzem b'bechinas kav. It gets constrained and contained and contracted in a kav form. Li yesh lifi erech ha'elamei, so that it should become lifi erech ha'elamis. That this oil becomes lifi erech ha'elamis in proximity to worlds. So there are, as we're going to go through this, we'll make the emphasis as we go through, but I just want to point in general right now, there are two principles that we're discussing right now. Just as in the moshel, there's the river, and then there's the tziner godel, and then there are the multiple tzinoiros, the sub-tzinoiros. So there are three distinct entities. The river, then there's a tziner godel, and then there is small tzinoiros. The difference between the river and the tziner godel is not just how much water is contained in the tziner and how much water is contained in the river. There is a categorical difference. Do I have you with me? There is a categorical difference. Because the water in the river is not something that flows into the river. This is the resource. It's a constant resource. It's not coming into the river. The river is there. The tziner, even though it's a large tziner, but it already has the principle that it doesn't have water of its own. The water has to come from someplace. That already gives it a similarity, a shaychus l'oilums. Because the principle of oilums, again, in oilums, what is the concept of cause and effect? Cause and effect means there is something lacking and I'm filling it. I'm hungry, so I eat. That's they say the Ishtalshalos. There has to be a need in order to fill it. In the tziner godel, that concept already exists, even though it's a tziner godel, but it doesn't have water on its own. It has to be nimshech into it. Therefore, it already has so to speak, the parameter, the worldly parameter of that it needs to be filled, needs to be created. In Oil Ein Sof, there is no sense that it's created. It's the reality of Atzmas itself. So this is the first step. And then, once there is this flow, once there is the whole concept that there is no oil and it's nimshach, then you can then subdivide that and create what's called, in the muscle, smaller tzineros, smaller conduits. The smaller conduits, the difference between them and the large conduit is quantitative, not categorical. And that's how it's possible to be nimshach, because there is a commonality, there's a relationship between them. The Mishnah says, "Lehabayshon lomed, v'lehakabdon melamed." That a baishon, one who is restrained, who is embarrassed to ask a question, he cannot learn, ultimately, because he'll remain with his question. He will never get a clarity. And the kabdon cannot teach. What's a kabdon? A kabdon is one who cannot relate to a question. How do you have such a question? Why can he relate to that question? Because he doesn't see the basis for such a question. So this is a similar thing. But in order to be that the Melamed should be able to be Melamed, he has to descend down to the Talmud and try to understand the Talmud's perspective and position. How come he doesn't know this? How come he is blinded in this and so forth? Okay. All right, let's go inside, Mike.
Rabbi Paltiel?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, this is kind of maybe a stupid question, but we start from the Nahar, and the Nahar is the mashal for Atzmas. Why are we using a Nahar? In our context, we think, well,
Bara. The mashal Nahar is a mashal for Oil Ein Sof, not for Atzmas.
Okay. So why are we Oil Ein Sof? Fine. Before the Tzimtzum, in other words.
Right.
This is before the Tzimtzum.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mashal for what's there before a Tzimtzum. Yeah.
Right.
Why are we using Nahar as opposed to ocean, a river and not an ocean? I have an idea what could be an answer, but I'd like to hear your answer.
Go ahead. I'd like to hear your answer.
No, that's not fair. No one else wants to hear my answer.
It's not true.
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
An ocean, I guess a nahar is something which is, first of all, it's fresh water, and an ocean is not. And secondly, it's coming from, it's an endless flow. An ocean is there, and that's as much as there is whatever is in it.
Right.
It's not infinitely developing. I don't know. Is that something like it?
Yeah. Well, that is precisely the reason. In the river, the principle, the idea of Oil Ein Sof is recognized in the river. Even though in the Gemara, in the Halacha, the ocean is called Baim Shein Lahem Sof. And over there, the Maim Shein Lahem Sof is denoting the fact that you don't see the other side. beachhead.
But as a matter of fact, it actually is more of a not Ein Sof than the river.
But conceptually, that's correct. In the sense
Okay.
that the river is connected to a constant resource.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And because it's connected to a constant resource, the river cannot be measured in terms of quantity. Quantity is insignificant looking at the river.
Right.
Isn't the resource the
Huh?
isn't the resource the ocean? Eventually, isn't that the resource? Isn't because the Nile is moving, the Orient Stuff is doing something?
The resource is the ocean?
Isn't the river's resource eventually an ocean?
No. The river falls into the river feeds the ocean, not the other way around.
The river is endless resource because it's coming from a Maya.
Because it comes from a wire. All right. We have stumped this sufficiently. Okay.
What is the Hakav and Kav? Between Hakav and Kav. Hakav and Kav.
Let me read the words. "V'adugma mizeh yuvan b'bchinas hakav." A similar thing. From this we will understand how the principle of the kav. Hakav means the kav. Shehu al derech moshel tziner godel. Now the kav is like the tziner godel as a moshel. Hanim shech ma'er insof shifnei hatzimtzum, that is drawn from the insof shifnei hatzimtzum. It's drawn from there, and that gives it a concept of a kav. When it's something bebechinas kav, that's what it's drawn from there, and it's something bebechinas kav, and then it's something bebechinas kav in a kav form. Liyos lefi erech ha'ilmis, and what is the purpose of this simtzum of the Da'ishim become like a kav? And it should be in proximity to worlds. And we explained many times it means that it has, so to speak, the worldly parameters. And what is the worldly parameters? In principle, not having and getting and obtaining it. That's the first principle of world. How does the kav become? How does this hamshocha become? Lefieracho ilmis, letzumtzum. Hainu, and that is alidei hamshochosei derech hatzimtzum. As a result of the fact that the oil from the oil of oil in soif, that is before the tzimtzum, is nimshach. But mit derech hatzimtzum is nimshach via and through the tzimtzum. Or rishimu, and it is nimshach via derech hatzimtzum and derech rishimu, because the word derech applies both. The derech means via the tzimtzum and the rishimu. Shezehu, which is the rishimu is Bechinas koyach hagvul shebein soif. The koyach hagvul aspect in soif. We will briefly discuss it in a moment. Shenizgale alidei hatzimtzum, which was revealed and surfaced as a result of the tzimtzum. V'alidei zeh, no, we'll stop right here for a moment. Yeah. So the Tzimtzum left a Rishimu. And the Rishimu, this is the Bechina that is in, this is what's called Koyach HaGvul Shebein Soif. It's the Koyach HaGvul Shebein Soif that came to the surface, came to be identified through the Tzimtzum. Now, this is not the place to describe definitively and conclusively the whole meaning of the Rishima and so forth. It's too early. But the simplest way for us to relate to the principle of Rishimu is, as we said many times, that in principle, let's say taking the moshel to a signal. In principle, it's impossible to take somebody else's property. If one perceives the truth, you can't miss that one. If one perceives the truth, as the Rambam states it, that there's a motzu rishon mamtzi kol nimtzu. In amitis imotzi nimtzu kol nimtzoim. All nimtzoim represent amitis imotzi. It's a fundamental truth in everything that exists. A godly truth. Small or large as it is. So how can the whole concept of violating that is impossible? If this belongs to you, it belongs to you with the principle of amitis imotzi, a godly truth. How can you violate the godly truth? There's no possibility for it. Not that you wouldn't dare. It's not possible. How can you violate the godly truth? So when you are, so to speak, fully aware, like the Rav is, that this is the reality, this is the perspective from which he sees the whole world, he cannot begin to talk about don't steal. In order to begin to talk about don't steal, he has to be mitzamtim his oyer. And when he's mitzamtim the oyer, what does he see? He sees the mitzvahs of the world. He doesn't see the oyer in soif, the amitis imotzi that creates the world. He sees the mitzvahs of the world. That's a rishim. And here he can begin to talk, worldly talks.
He has to reduce his own, or tzamtzem his own, or
remove his own.
Remove it, and then he sees the world.
Then he sees the world.
And that's
a Rishimu.
What is the world per se is Rishimu, is a trace of the light that he removed.
That's right. Trace of the reality, right? But it's only a trace. There's no oil in there. And now he's going to begin to explain, okay, this is a world, but you know where it's coming from. It's a godly creation.
When you say see the world, you mean like the physicality?
The Metzias. That's what the Rishima. This is our emotion. That's what the Rishima. But the bottom line, the bottommost presence, without the oil inside, without its primary reality, Now first it has to start creating a whole structure and do's and don'ts and explanation why do's and don'ts until he's mamshing the whole oil back.
Funny, even to teach a Torah seichel, he's having to reduce his.
Sure.
That's almost to say he's living with like the result of Torah. Then he has to sort of hide that.
That's
light
why we have in Torah two distinct sections.
Nigla and Nista.
Nigla and Nista.
Nigla is based on his presentation of filling a void, and Nistar is based on the presentation. There's no presentation. It's a reality.
Of the reality. Of the heart of it, the neshama of it.
That's right.
But a trace of reality is not world. This is reality.
It's only a trace of reality.
But it's not world as a.
It is world. I own this. Can you see that God gave it to me, or do you think I got some other way?
So then, if that's the case, then it's not a trace of reality.
It is.
If I cannot see that God gave you that, then I'm not.
You don't see the result. That's a trace. See the result of the fact that God gave it to me. You don't see Him giving it to me, but you see that He is there. That's the oil. That's what the mashpia is supposed to illuminate. Tell you, don't steal this, because it's not yours.
And they have two different makoros. They're not really connected, the or and the keli. They're just connected because God said so. But like the nigla and the nistar, the or and the keli.
No, they are connected. Of course, they are connected. But this is called the tzimtzum, and it goes to a helam. Okay. So because the oil goes through the rishimu, which is the koyach hagvul shebein soy, which means, in our analogy, that to give it a very limited and specific presence, and then into that you draw the oil to illuminate that presence. That oil is very limited. It goes through it's called the koyach hagvul.
Rabbi Paltiel,
Uh-huh.
is it off track to ask you, since we started with the mushal of the river and the tziner, is there something that in that mushal could identify? He's saying here derech hatzimtzum and derech harishima, which is there something in the mushal that identifies Rishima, which seems to be not such an easy concept? Not that Tzimtzum is any easier. Or is that not helpful?
Well, I don't know if it's helpful, but I don't know if something made you think of it. The thing is like this. You have a river, and the river flows on a constant basis. You are totally unaware that there is a river bed. As far as you're concerned, this is a bottomless pit. When you are withdrawing the water, and you say, no, oh, this water is sitting on a bed, on a ground bed. There's a limit to it as well. In other words, the water can relate to finity. That's the That's the Shimo element. Even though there is an infinite resource here, and the whole question of where the water comes from is inapplicable, because it doesn't come, it's just the reality, the natural reality of the water presence. And but nevertheless, you are going to identify the water. Let's put it in simple terms. When the water is in the river, you don't even think in terms of the water being able to be put into a cave. The water does not have, as you're looking at it, does not have definitive measures that it can go into a cave. It's just one huge amount of flow of water. When you will be able to identify and see that this river water actually has a bed, in other words, it is containable in a cave. It can be subdivided into a tziner, into smaller tzineres. That is the koyach hagvul within this river.
So the river bed, the withdrawal of the water, if you would withdraw the water, you'd see the bed.
You'd see the bed.
This is like withdrawing the light, you see the Rishima.
Right. In a sense. All right. Since Galal de had Tzimtzum, and this Rishimo surfaced through the Tzimtzum. And then as a result, Bohoir in Soiv habilti bal gvul. So then the oil in Soiv, which is bilti bal gvul, came bebechinas koyach gvuli, in the realm of a koyach gvuli, of a finite koyach. All right, there's certain things to discuss. I don't want to go far. Just want to point out. Translate these words. The oil is bilti bal gvul. Why is the oil is bilti bal gvul? Just like the river is bilti bal gvul, because it has an essential source. It's sourced in a primary reality, which is Atzmus, which is Elokus. And then, as a result of the Tzimtzum, that oil comes and is exposed as a koyach gvuli. And the koyach gvuli means that it can function and affect within a limited parameters. The truth is, even when it was bli gvul, it had all the koyach gvuli, but it wasn't identifiable. But the Tzimtzum, then this oil comes and expresses itself in a koyach gvuli. Like we said before in the Moshel. Bilti bal gvul, this is a godly reality. There's no possibility of violating it. Then when you remove the oil, there's a koyach gvuli. What is a koyach gvuli? He owns it. And if you violate, you're gonna be punished. This is all koyad gvul. So that the oir acquires a medido, a measurement, is in proximity to worlds. And then through and as a result of the services of this kav, the oil then is drawn in all the 10 spheres of Bechol oilo v'oilo. The 10 spheres are in all the different worlds. This is the union that the river, that you can draw the water through the tziner into many, many kelim. Okay. Okay, now we're going more into the kav element. Kenoida, as is known, the kav hazeh, that this kav boikeya as hatzimtzum, it pierces through and breaks through the tzimtzum, which means that essentially this kav, this is something which we are going to discuss at great length later on, but we already learned it, so we might as well bring in the light into here, that this kav is actually a reintroduction of the Ayin Seif. Like we would say in our mashal, you don't see the godly truth, but I want you to know that God forbids you to take this. This is reintroduction of the Ayin Seif. You should not take this property which belongs to this person, not because because he is going to protest, but because God said you shouldn't do it. That is reintroduction of the Ayin Seif.
And before the tzimtzum?
I'm sorry?
And before the tzimtzum?
Before the tzimtzum, there isn't that whole possibility. Don't do it because God said it doesn't exist but for the fact that God made it. That it's God's. And like the Rambam says, what?
When we say that Hashem said don't do it, so you're saying that that's some don't, not exactly without a time.
No.
There's a
Don't
reason.
do it whether it's without a time. And the point is, you are in a world where to do it is a viable thought, and you have to be taught. You have to be revealed that you're not supposed to do it. And it is in such an environment where you can say, don't do it because he's going to get angry. You're violating this person. To say that you don't do it because you're violating a godly principle is bringing back an oil that's before word. And it's illuminating this issue.
It's illuminating.
Goes through the machine. This is what we're discussing is all emotional for this, but in principle this Indian, this Chosev Heir is a phenomenal Indian.
Illuminating the Rishimos Chosev.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, Saved by the Bell.
Not that to make the bell a little louder. All right. Have a good evening, whoever is on conference line. Bye bye.
Danny, what's doing with the Fabrillion? What did you decide?
We have a co-sponsor.
Okay, that's it. Do you have a co-sponsor with this Shabbos Fabrillion?
I Paltiel Mazel Tov on the
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You know what?
Na 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 na